Okay, thank you and good evening. I'll be presenting the Scrutiny Report into the Noel Park Major Works Programme, which was authored by Councillor Gordon, as you just heard, in her capacity then as the chair of the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel. She's now in the Cabinet. So before proceeding any further, I want to state that I've checked and there aren't any conflicts in my presenting this scrutiny report. Yes, I used to live in Noel Park. My parents still live there and I am now a ward councillor. I've had direct engagement with the Noel Park leaseholders who are affected by this scrutiny report on what I'm about to present, which is perfectly in line with the new Cabinet's approach to co-design and co-production. I'm one for using plain English, and in my case, it means that I've spoken directly with the Noel Park leaseholders, and what I'm about to say reflects their views as well. Now, there are three broad points that I'll make. First of all, we are grateful to the Cabinet for accepting the overwhelming majority of the 20 recommendations in the scrutiny report. Secondly, we are a little surprised and disappointed that you are rejecting recommendations 1 and 20 and that you're only partially accepting recommendation 12. After all, the report was authored by Councillor Gordon, who's now one of the Cabinet members. And for the reasons that I will explain, we'd like you to adopt all of the recommendations without any exception. Not least because Councillor Ahmed, who is the leader of the council, said in response to a question from one of the leaseholders, Sarah Klimku, at last week's Overview in the Scrutiny Committee meeting, that she stands by the scrutiny report. Third point that I'll make is that there are recommendations that you are supposedly accepting, but the effect of the Cabinet response is that the scope of the recommendation has been altered so fundamentally that it reads like a rejection, or that the scope has been watered down so much that it does not give effect to what was intended in the original scrutiny report. Again, I will elaborate shortly. So turning now first to the recommendation that you're rejecting or partially agreeing. Recommendation 1 is about an independent investigation into why responses to leaseholder questions after receiving the Section 20 notice in September 2020 were not provided in full or in good time. The Cabinet response for rejecting this is not acceptable for the following reasons. First of all, the response said that the leaseholders are not legally entitled to seek further particulars of the works and cost. We should not be operating to what is just the statutory minimum. That represents the bare minimum. If the new Cabinet is serious about co-design and co-production, then we need to be as transparent as possible and provide as much information to residents as possible. Secondly, the suggestion that there was a high volume of complex questions that leaseholders organised collectively to ask the same questions, that should not be material. The high volume and the complexity of the questions demonstrates how poor the communication and the consultation had been prior to the Section 20 notice being sent last September. The leaseholders, they share common concerns and may have very similar observations that they wish to raise, which is why they did organise collectively. And in the Cabinet response, it's also stated that they were not sure if some of the questioned should be treated as freedom of information requests. Again, this is not acceptable because freedom of information rules should not be used to ignore observations simply because some leaseholders have helped each other collectively. The Cabinet response also said that there was a session on lessons learned and that this session had taken place. In the interests of transparency, it is essential that any reports resulting from this lessons learned session should be made publicly available. So that's recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 12 is about the cost of removal of asbestos from the pods, and the recommendation said that it should be borne by the council, the freeholder, and that Cabinet is only accepting this partially. The leaseholders believe that there have been clear failings in the way that Homes for Haringey has managed the issue of asbestos across the state. Had the works been done when they should have been done, asbestos could have been removed from the pods much more cheaply, off-site, something that is, I understand, no longer safe to do. Residents have been living in, unsafe homes for years now due to the Homes for Haringey inaction. We believe that this recommendation should be implemented in full, with all costs relating to asbestos removal being borne by the council as the leaseholder. And finally, recommendation 20, which you are rejecting, is about setting up a contracts and oversight procurement committee. We'll simply refer you back to the original scrutiny review as to why this is an important recommendation and it should be implemented in full. I'll now turn to the recommendations that you have accepted, but the scope.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt, Councillor Moy? Sorry, but I appreciate that you've gone into this detail, which is very good. But you were asked whether you could introduce your report, but not actually do a full critique of the review itself. So
no, with Councillor Hakata, this is not a critique. This is not a critique of the review. This is a critique of the Cabinet response to the Scrutiny Report. And I'm just setting out my reasons why, first of all, the reasons that you've given in the Cabinet response, why they're not acceptable, and that the 3 recommendations in the Scrutiny Report, why they should be implemented in full. And secondly, as I was just about to set out, so this is a response to the Cabinet response, which is in the papers, in the Cabinet papers.
Sorry, Councillor, just to interrupt, but we haven't. You were meant to be introducing your report, or at least presenting that report, and just sort of giving a précis of it. So I don't know if actually the situation was that you were going to give a response and critique of the review. So it was meant.
No,
to
it
be
is not a response and critique.
Of your report.
It is not a response and critique of the review. I'm actually presenting the review. I'm responding to the Cabinet response, and I'm pointing out where there are certain circumstances where the response is that it's been watered down, the scope has been watered down, so much so that the original scope has been altered fundamentally. That's what I'm about to explain. And I've just finished explaining where the 3 recommendations that you're proposing to reject, they should not be rejected, they should be implemented in full. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm presenting the Scrutiny Report as it was authored, as it was finalized.
Okay, look, just the 5 minutes allotted are actually up, but I will say, that you have given a good and detailed.
No, but can I just very briefly?
You have given a detailed response to those 3 points, which were obviously at the top of your list, so very important, and I understand why. But the allotted time has actually been used up now, Councillor Moeed. So
no, but I just need to mention there are 3 other recommendations very briefly, 3 quick sentences. Recommendation 7 was that a guarantee on the cladding outside the pods. The original report said that it should be for as long as the pods are there. However, the Cabinet response limits this to 12 years, which is not acceptable. Recommendation 9 says, it should be established how estimates for pod replacement and other works have escalated over the time period. and the cabinet response is that this reflects the industry-wide cost inflation. Again, this is not acceptable. We have heard that the costs have gone up because the works have been left for such a long time.
Councillor Mayhew, sorry, but we're going well over the time, and I appreciate that you want to share as much information as possible, but you have gone well over the time. And just to underline the fact that absolutely this process is not over, and as I introduced this agenda item, Councillor Ahmed will be meeting leaseholders this week, and that this process is continuing. So what you're saying is being noted, it is being listened to.
But can I just say,
you have to move on to the next item, I'm afraid.
yeah, can I just say, Councillor Hakata, that it is important because I've done this exercise with the leaseholders' views. I've consulted them, and I understand this is your first cabinet meeting, and congratulations in your new role. But I was simply introducing the scrutiny report as it was originally compiled, and that entails I know that I understand, but that does entail that does entail criticizing the cabinet response to it, because the cabinet
and you have done that, and it is noted and it is appreciated and the detail is appreciated, but if you can understand, it is a very packed agenda and we do need to move on. So I do thank you for those comments, and obviously the conversation will continue beyond this meeting.
So the report should be adopted in full. That's the message. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.